The room was quiet, too quiet for what had just been said. Maggie Elwood sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the crisp white coat across from her. The doctor was speaking, his mouth moving in rhythm with some sort of practiced empathy, but the words had already landed. Heavy, final, unshakable. "At this point, there's nothing more we can do," he repeated gently. "It's time to focus on comfort. Quality of life." She nodded, not because she understood she did, but because the gesture gave her something to do. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, a lifeboat of fingers holding her together. Stage 4, ovarian cancer. 6 to 9 months, palliative care, hospice, home. Home. The word echoed in her mind like a joke with a cruel punchline. Home wasn't comfort. Home was a 2-bedroom apartment in Manhattan, still echoing with the silence of a life that had unraveled. The divorce. The job she left because the deadlines made her chest ache harder than the tumors ever could. The days of forgetting to eat. The nights of remembering too much. She walked out of the clinic into the sharp brightness of a mid-October morning. Autumn, in New York, had always been her favorite: fiery leaves, smoky air people in long coats with places to be. Now it felt theatrical, staged, like a backdrop painted for someone else's life, not hers. That night she pulled the curtains halfway and poured herself a glass of wine. The good kind, saved for a birthday she had skipped celebrating. She found the bottle of sleeping pills in the second drawer where she'd left it months ago, just in case. Her cat had died 2 years prior. No one had taken his place. She placed the wine and the pills on the table and sat before them like a student facing a final exam. But her fingers trembled. Her breath caught. There was no fear, only weariness, a kind of spiritual exhaustion that seeped into the bones. The thought of 6 more months of this waiting to fade felt unbearable. She closed her eyes, and then something moved. A flicker of motion from the window. Across the alley on the 5th floor of the facing building, a girl stood by a hospital bed. Her head bald, a line of tubes dangling from her arms, but her face was luminous. She waved, smiled. Maggie froze. The girl must have seen her silhouette in the half-drawn window. The smile was not accidental. It was not unaware. It was direct, real, full of life. Maggie exhaled a sound between a sob and a laugh. The girl tilted her head and without words reminded her that there was something left. Something unknown. Not miraculous, not promised, but possible. She rose, walked to the kitchen and poured the wine down the sink. That night, she didn't die. The days that followed passed like film-negative shadows of intention barely formed. Maggie went through motions that felt borrowed from someone braver. She canceled her insurance, liquidated her savings, sold her belongings piece by piece. No one objected. There was no family to question her. Friends had become text messages. Work was a chapter long closed. On the 12th day, she left New York. It wasn't a dramatic departure. She didn't throw her keys into the Hudson or write a manifesto. She simply packed a suitcase, closed the door behind her, and walked away. The taxi driver who took her to the train station asked where she was going. She said, "Somewhere that doesn't look like death." He didn't ask further. Asheville, North Carolina. She had visited once years ago on assignment for the magazine. She remembered the quiet dignity of the mountains, the way the morning mist curled like breath around the trees. There had been a shop that sold handmade tea blends and incense. A woman with long silver hair had told her, "This town remembers how to rest." At the time, it had felt poetic. Now, it felt like a destination. The train ride was long. She stared out the window, counting rusted fences and silos, abandoned stations, and ghost towns of forgotten ambition. The further she went, the lighter her chest felt, as if each mile stripped away the cement of the city, the density of dread. In Asheville, she checked into a modest cabin on the outskirts of town near a ridge where birds nested and the trees didn't care who you used to be. There was no Wi-Fi, no television, just silence, and that peculiar quiet of things that have nothing left to prove. The center was called Stillwater Sanctuary. It wasn't a hospital. It wasn't even a retreat exactly. It was a place people went when they didn't know what else to do. There were no advertisements, no website, just word of mouth passed gently among those who understood that some healing begins where hope had once ended. Sister Annika greeted her on the first morning. She wore cotton robes the color of rain, and her voice sounded like a lullaby forgotten by the world. "You're not here to be saved," she said. "You're here to stop running." Maggie didn't argue. She no longer had the strength to pretend. The days were simple. Sunrise meditations, meals of warm grains, leafy greens, and herbal broths. Breathing exercises that sometimes ended in tears she hadn't known she was holding. No one asked why she had come. No one needed to. At night, she lay beneath a quilted blanket watching the shadows dance on the wood-paneled ceiling. Her body still ached. The tumors still grew. But something in her was softening, a kind of resistance she'd carried for decades now, easing its grip. One afternoon, she sat under a willow tree with a journal she found in the cabin drawer. The pages were blank, yellowed, waiting. She wrote one sentence, "I want to live not because I'm afraid of dying, but because I've never truly lived." It was the first thing she had written that mattered in years. If this story speaks to your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. There are more journeys of light waiting to be heard. That night, Maggie lit a candle. Not for ritual, not for religion, just for stillness. The flame swayed with the breath of the earth. And Maggie Margaret Elwood, former editor once lost, now simply present, watched it glow as if it had something to teach her. It did. She whispered to the flame, "Thank you for staying lit." She wasn't talking to the candle, she was talking to herself. And though the world had not changed, though the cells in her body still conspired against her, something unseen had shifted. That night again, she didn't die. There were no clocks at Stillwater Sanctuary, no bells to mark the hour, no schedules posted on walls. Time here moved differently, less like a ticking machine and more like a tide. It rose when it rose, receded when it pleased, and carried those who surrendered to its rhythm. For Maggie Elwood, surrender did not come easily. She had spent her adult life orchestrating structure deadlines, checklists, expectations folded into expectations. She had been the woman who knew the word count, the file order, the font style for final submissions. She had ruled her world with the precision of someone who feared what would happen if she didn't. And now, here there was no structure, just breath and earth and pain. The pain came in waves. Some days it was a dull murmur beneath the surface like a sad song playing in the next room. Other days it was a thunderclap behind her eyes. Her body no longer followed familiar rules. Appetite vanished. Sleep became a fragile thing. She walked slowly, deliberately, as if her bones had forgotten how to be carried. She didn't fight it, not anymore. Fighting had exhausted her. Instead, she observed it. She let the pain pass through her like weather. Sister Annika had told her during one of their first shared silences, "What you resist persists. What you welcome transforms." At first, Maggie thought it was just another fortune cookie aphorism, but over time the words settled somewhere beneath her ribs. There was truth in them, not loud, not flashy, but quiet and stubborn like moss on stone. So she began welcoming things. She welcomed the ache in her hips during morning yoga, the taste of bitterness in the herbal tea she still couldn't name. She welcomed the rising of the sun through the blinds even when her body had barely slept. She welcomed the blank page of her journal even when she had nothing to say. One night a storm came, not one of wind or rain, but something more personal. A fever crept into her skin. Her joints burned. Her chest tightened with each breath. She stayed in bed, eyes closed, palms over her heart, waiting. The storm broke just after midnight. She cried out not in fear, but in something deeper. The pain was unbearable, yes. But beneath the pain there was another kind of scream. Not of the body, of memory. She was 7 again. It came so fast like a film reel jerked into motion. She was back in the hallway of her childhood home, the light flickering, her father's voice slurred with fury. Her mother sobbing in the kitchen. The sound of a plate shattering. Maggie, small and shaking, had curled herself into the closet pressed between coats that smelled of mothballs and winter. She remembered counting, not for safety, but for distraction. 1, 2, 3. She had never told anyone. Not a friend, not her ex-husband, not a therapist. She had buried it in the name of survival. Now it was unburied, and it burned. In the darkness of the cabin, drenched in sweat and memory, Maggie opened her eyes. She whispered, "I see you." It wasn't clear if she was talking to the fever, the memory, or the girl she had once been. Maybe all of them. She didn't move. Just let it come. The shaking, the sobbing, the weight of years she had carried in her shoulders without even realizing it. At some point, minutes or hours later, time had long dissolved. She felt it. A hand on her shoulder. Warm, feminine, familiar. She didn't turn, but she felt it. And then she heard it. "You're safe now, baby." It was a voice she hadn't heard since she was 19. A voice that used to sing to her when the power went out. A voice that had once whispered, "No matter what he says, you're enough." Her mother's voice. Was it real? Was it imagined? Did it matter? When morning came, Maggie felt hollowed out but not empty. It was a clean kind of hollow, the way riverbeds feel after the water recedes. The pain hadn't vanished, but something inside her had shifted. Later that day, she opened her journal and wrote, "I forgive you, Dad. Not because you earned it, but because I refuse to carry your ghosts. I forgive you, Mom, for staying, for suffering in silence, for being human. I forgive myself for not screaming, for not running, for surviving." She closed the book and placed it on the shelf, not to forget, but to remember differently. Days passed in quiet recovery. Sister Annika didn't ask questions. She brought her tea, sat in stillness, let Maggie speak or not speak. There was no ceremony, no revelation, only breath and breath and breath. Healing, Maggie learned, wasn't always about victory. It wasn't a miracle moment or a triumphant return. Sometimes healing was the decision not to disappear. Sometimes it was as simple as making breakfast even when you didn't feel hungry, or putting your feet on the floor and saying, "I'm still here." Sometimes it was just sitting in the sun and letting it warm your face. She began doing small things, clipping herbs from the garden, washing her hair with care instead of indifference, watering the plants in her room, naming them Grace Ember. Stillness. She cooked a pot of rice with mushrooms one evening and cried into the steam, not out of sadness, but because it was the first thing she had cooked for herself since she had left New York. She thought about the girl in the window, the one who smiled that night when Maggie nearly died. Was she still there? Was she ever real? Maggie didn't know. But every time she looked at the stars, now she whispered, "Thank you." If Maggie's journey is stirring something in your soul, please subscribe to our channel. Stories like hers deserve to be heard and shared. One morning, as the fog curled along the mountain edge and the sanctuary awoke with birdsong, Maggie stood at the edge of the ridge behind her cabin. She wasn't thinking about death. She wasn't even thinking about life. She was simply being, for the first time in decades. There was no announcement, no decision to stay, no contract signed. Maggie Elwood simply remained. The original plan was never to make plans. She had come to Asheville to wait for death. But when death failed to arrive, when grief softened and space opened, life quietly stepped in. It started with a chair. One of the guests at Stillwater Sanctuary, a young man named Daniel, had noticed Maggie meditating on the porch each morning. He asked if he could sit nearby. She said nothing, only nodded. The next day, another woman joined, then 2 more. No one spoke. There were no guided affirmations, no rituals, no expectations. Just silence. Shared. Intentional. After a week, Maggie began bringing a small clay bowl filled with warm water and rosemary. She placed it in the center of the group not as a symbol, but as a gesture, a presence. The water reflected the sky, the herbs added scent to the morning air. That was all. That was enough. Word spread. More people came. Survivors, caregivers. Wanderers with stories they hadn't yet spoken aloud. They didn't come to be fixed. They came to remember. The group began to meet twice a week, then daily, and they named themselves the Circle of Still. Maggie didn't teach. She didn't claim wisdom or offer lectures. She showed up. She listened. She breathed. In doing so, she became a lighthouse not by shining or speaking, but simply by standing still in the dark and refusing to disappear. Her body surprisingly remained steady. There were days of fatigue, yes. Nights where aches returned like distant echoes, but there was no fear now. She no longer checked her body for signs of doom. She no longer measured herself by reports or predictions. Instead, she measured life by the weight of a quiet morning, the aroma of baked bread, the way sunlight warmed her back through a cotton shawl. Autumn came again. 1 year since the diagnosis. The trees flamed gold and rust. Maggie stood beneath a red maple and watched the leaves surrender without resistance. There was a kind of holiness in that, a quiet letting go. That night she returned to her cabin and lit a candle. Beside it lay a sealed envelope, untouched for weeks. The letter inside had taken her months to write. Words she had rewritten, hesitated over, cried through. A letter to the girl in the window. She wrote, "Dear Lightbringer, you don't know me, or maybe somehow you do. 1 year ago, I saw your smile through the hospital window. I don't know your name, your story, or if you're still in this world, but you saved my life, truly, utterly, silently. That night, I planned to die, not because I feared pain, but because I had forgotten how to hope. Then you appeared, frail but radiant, fragile but joyful. You reminded me that presence is powerful, that a moment, a single glance can reroute destiny. I wanted you to know I stayed, and because I stayed, I healed. Not all at once, not physically alone, but in the places that matter, in the wounds you cannot see, in the stories I once buried. I don't know where you are now, but I carry you. You live in the people I sit with, in the letters I write, in the seeds I plant. I never got to say thank you, so here it is written by candlelight carried on breath woven into time. Thank you for smiling. That single act saved a woman the world had already given up on." She folded the letter and placed it beneath the candle. The flame flickered, casting shadows like dancing memories. She closed her eyes not to sleep, but to remember more deeply. Stillwater Sanctuary changed. Not because of Maggie, but around her. People began requesting sessions with her, not counseling, just time. She would sit across from them, hold space, and let them unspool their burdens. Sometimes they cried, sometimes they laughed. Mostly they sat in silence and left feeling lighter. She wasn't a healer, she was a witness, and in a world drowning in noise, being witnessed was healing enough. She wrote small reflections in her journal, which slowly became a manuscript. Not a memoir, not a survival story, something gentler. It was called The Days I Chose to Live. She didn't publish it. She printed 15 copies and left them anonymously in hospital waiting rooms, hospice libraries, and cafes near oncology centers. Each one had a handwritten note. If you found this, it was meant for you. If these words have stirred something true inside you, please subscribe to our channel. Stories like Maggie's deserve to reach hearts ready to receive them. On the anniversary of her arrival in Asheville, Maggie walked barefoot into the woods behind Stillwater. She carried a small jar of rose petals, a candle, and a folded note. At the base of an old cedar she knelt. She lit the candle, released the petals to the wind, whispered a blessing no one heard, and then she read aloud, "I didn't beat cancer. I outlived despair. I stopped bargaining with death and started befriending life. I am not cured, but I am whole." She pressed the note into the hollow of the tree. It wasn't for the tree. It was for the part of her that had once curled into a closet and waited for someone to say, "You're safe now." That someone had become her, the film of her life. If it had one, would end there, not with triumph, not with closure, but with roots growing quietly underground, unseen, steady, full of promise. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay.